Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to the third session of the Outage Improvement Advisory Team. Just glad to see everybody here. And one of the things we do know is that when we want to have this meeting, we know that it's going to be around the time when we get stormy weather. So that's to keep us reminding us about the fact that we're talking about outages, right? And we had some outages, by the way, last night. Still got a few this morning that our crews are actually dealing with. So, but good to see everybody this morning. Thank you for being here. And so today we're going to spend some time going through, of course, if we're going to go through some questions, I'll let Brian kind of cover that. Alonzo is going to talk a little bit about the tree trimming process. We had some conversations, as you may recall, at the last session about that. So Alonzo is going to spend some time reviewing that process. We do have a video that speaks to the process. We've got some employees that are on the video that actually are engaged in our field process with our field folks that will help maybe with an understanding of what goes on in outage restoration and that process. And really then we want to, before we end today, end up getting your feedback on some potential solutions, things that can be done that will enhance the process itself from a customer perspective. So really, part of the biggest reason you're here is to give us that feedback to help us understand specifically some thoughts that you may have. We want to talk at some point, Doug is going to probably do some of this, talk about some probable policy implications maybe that may be associated with some of those things. And I'll tell you in advance, we're planning an additional meeting, which may be the last meeting in, I think it's going to be June 16th. We'll talk more about that. But we may have some of those solutions refined, and we'll talk more about the details around that a little bit later. But again, thanks for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Doug for any opening comments you may have.
Thanks, JT. And we're down to the faithful few, so we know we're going to get some action today because our crowd has thinned to about half. So we appreciate all the familiar faces who are coming back time after time. So I know today is going to be short on dialogue from the panel and long on conversation with all of you. So again, as JT said, probably June 16th might be our wrap up. So what we want to do is really make sure we get every idea on the table today so that the staff can go back and start putting those into bins. Here's some investments that we can make in the distribution system. Here's some things that we can do with respect to, I'll call it hardening the system or redundancy. And then here's some things we can do with the tree trimming policy or investing in new tree trimming. But as JT said, I also want us to think about holding ourselves accountable and how do we, as a community, think about what the individual responsibility is. You know, we have that codified in a lot of ways. You know, you're not allowed to have multiple cars parked in your front yard because it junks up the neighborhood. You're not allowed to dump your motor oil in the street because obviously it harms your neighbors. So how do we think about that with respect to infrastructure that's impacted by, in this case, mostly vegetation that's on personal property? So we want to talk about what our overall perspective is on that. Do we have the resources necessary to do it? And then if we're asking homeowners to do more, we understand that there are a body of people here that may or may not be able to afford that. So do we want to put programs in place to help people, help us be more resilient? So I want to think about holistically how we approach this. So there's no such thing as a bad idea. We're going to get them all on the table and bring them back. So please be heard today. Please let us capture those thoughts so that we can go back and put them into various categories and bring you back some potential, like we could do this in the short term, this is a medium term, longer term, this one's low cost and we can do it right now. Look, we really want the low cost, high impact. How do we make those big jumps? And so thank you all again for being here today. So really look forward to hearing your feedback. I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, and certainly good to be back here in Memphis again, and I do think there's a trend that when I drive to town, I bring the storms with me or drive into your fault. So hopefully y'all keep inviting me back, because I always enjoy coming to Memphis. And another thing is with Memphis is great basketball. It's good to see the Grizzlies doing well. I don't know who, if everybody's seen the news, but the unfortunate news of the suspension of Dylan Brooks for 3 games, but that's what I saw this morning on the news. So. For game 3. Oh, for game 3, sorry. Still suspended. You know, thank you for correcting me. And it's good to know that y'all listen when I talk. Yeah, I would like to just remind, I know we have some experts, as y'all have asked, to have some people from MLGW here, and if there's a question that you're responding to and you're an MLGW employee, if you would just come to the front, we can give you a mic. It just works a lot better if they can see you and hear you instead of having to twist around. So as we get questions that if you're in your specific area of expertise, we just ask that you would come forward for that. So today's session is not being streamed live, it's being recorded, and certainly we've got the same purpose, have everybody here to gather this information. I think Doug and JT have already lined that out. So with that, we will look at the questions and comments that have been shared. And as remember, session 1, we were kind of at the base level talking about the power industry and how things have evolved over the decades in the history of Memphis and every city, for that matter, across the United States. With regards to, at one point everything was overhead, and then things started to move underground as developers paid those costs to put things underground. And then last session, we spent a lot of time looking specifically at the impacts of Landon and what that did, which triggered this. And I think this is again a great opportunity, and appreciate MLGW and the city of Memphis taking time to bring a group together to hear your thoughts, and certainly the board chairs here as well. So I think that's very important when we think about this and the public power and the process of bringing people together, because your input does matter. And in front of you there are some of the Q&A from last time, so therefore you have that to review with what those are. And with that, we will look at the next questions that have come in here. Okay, there was a mention of looking into overflow call volume with the University of Memphis. What sort of timeline is there to address the high caller rates? And who's going to be answering that?
Probably Jim West,
Yeah, Mr. West.
Chief Customer Officer.
Please come forward. This is not the Price is Right.
He tried to stay on the back row, but we will not.
I know, I saw that.
Yeah, we have talked with the University of Memphis Research Foundation Ventures. They operate a call center. We've had one conversation with them. There are a number of vendors in the marketplace who provide that sort of service. Right now, we're trying to balance. As you probably heard me and Marjorie Sanderson talk about, we have a staffing challenge in our call center that's created some of the longer wait times to get your call answered. We have recently brought back some retirees who used to work in our call center to help us out. We have a contract with a temporary services agency, so we have a number of temporary employees coming on board. We're interviewing more over the next week. So we want to get those folks into the day-to-day business of the call center, and then sort of assess our needs so that we have our next conversation with U of M Research Foundation Ventures. We know a little bit about what our scope of need might be. Now let me say this in terms of timeline. It's not certain that we can just go out and engage a particular service to handle overflow call volume. The nature of being a public utility generally requires us to compete work that we're hiring for. We're going to explore whether we might be able to do something on a limited trial basis, but we've not explored all that yet. So my guess, just a guess, is it's probably in the range of about 90 days before we would be officially engaging someone to handle overflow call volume. That's just the process that we would need to go to scope it, determine how we might contract for that service, and then also to give our folks that have just come on board in the call center a little bit of time to get out and working the phones and see what that does to alleviate some of the pressures we're facing. Long-winded answer. I hope that addressed it. Any other questions or clarification I can offer before I give the mic back?
Those are decent paying jobs.
Absolutely, yeah.
We do a little advertising.
We do, and we're not the only business in Memphis facing challenges of trying to hire people. I'm just back from a couple weeks vacation, but the week before I left, there were 2 articles in the Commercial Appeal about the labor shortage, right? But we pay about $30 an hour. So it's a $60,000 a year job, which is, I believe, maybe about twice the going rate for call center work out in the private sector. So we're, plus the benefits of being an MLGW employee. So we're a little surprised, I think, as many businesses are trying to hire, that we're not getting more takers, more interest in applicants. But it's an ongoing effort. We're continuing to pursue that. But yeah, Mr. Graves is right. It's a good paying job with good benefits, so we love to hire people. Yes, ma'am.
I'll bring the mic back to you. Stay out here.
Only because, I mean, I'm just a citizen, but I had an issue with calling about a water outage that I had. And I thought at one of the meetings they discussed with the, is this the call center where they tell you, hold for 30 minutes? And then someone mentioned where they would be able to take your phone number and then call you back in the order the number was received. Wasn't that a
Yes.
discussion?
Yes, so we do have that capability.
And so they're gonna start trying to utilize that?
Yes, we will try to utilize that more. We have a few challenges in that many times when we place that outbound call. So we tend to talk in the industry about virtual hold. So hold your place in line and we'll call you back in X minutes, right? More often than we'd like to see, the caller doesn't pick up when we make the outbound call back to them. So we get into this sort of telephone tag situation. But we do have the capability. We use it in peak periods. And unfortunately, every day is sort of a peak period at the moment, given our staffing situation. But there are a number of things like that we can do. So the virtual hold option, outsourcing overflow call volume, and then there are a number of self-service options still available through the My Account app, through the MLGW.com website. So I always encourage people, if it's something that's pretty routine, there are a number of self-service options. You don't even need to talk to a live person. Yes, sir.
1 second.
When you call back, does it show MLGW on the call receiving? If it doesn't, that's why you're being hung up on.
It depends on the customer's carrier. So our telecom folks inside MLGW are, and we've just recently discovered this, are working with the telephone carriers to make sure that our caller ID shows up as MLGW. At a board meeting a couple of meetings ago, I mentioned we had discovered just recently that some carriers, the caller ID for our number shows state of Tennessee. So it depends on the person's carrier, and we're working with those carriers to make sure our caller ID shows up as MLGW. That's a great question. Thank you, sir.
All right, well, you may want to stick around. Let's go to number 2 up here. And certainly, you know, if you stop in Ponder for just a second, you got 100,000 people out. That's a lot of staff to be able to answer your call instantaneously, and so certainly technology. But so the next question here is about the technology, and you know, it says 21 hours to restore, promise restoration time pushed back 6 times. I do not know if it's from Landon or another event, but talking about your outage reporting tool, and said, you know, will you explain why it took 21 hours to turn power on, went out, let's see, automated status line kept saying power was restored and it was not. I had to keep reporting outage to get your attention. Automated reporting is a waste of time and does absolutely nothing to get the power turned back on.
So that is good feedback, and we heard a good bit of that in February ice storm. I'll refer to the power system folks to talk about the restoration time. But let me talk about the accuracy of the outage reporting. In a big event like we had, and I might be repeating things you heard at the last meeting, we know when the circuit comes back up, when the circuit is energized, we know that, and so our messaging, we changed during the big event to say power has been restored in your area. We're assuming with that first restoration of the circuit that everybody's back up. But there might be a tree that took down a service drop to an individual home, for example. So what we're doing now is developing more ways to actually reach out and communicate to the individual meter on the premise if it's a smart meter. So that's something that we've launched since the event in February, and we've been testing that. We had a little bit of an outage event a couple of weekends ago. We've been testing it. But we can't tell often in a big event whether each individual household is restored. We know the circuit is back up, but along that circuit there may be other fuse outages or individual premise outages where a service drop has been taken down. And so we encourage you, we ask you, if we are telling you that power is restored and you're still out, please let us know. Please, that outage reporting line, which is, I can't remember the number, bless my heart, But we have an outage reporting line that's automated. On day one of the big February ice storm, it handled 160,000 calls. Only about 3% of those calls could not be identified from the caller's phone number. So that is a great way to call and report through the automated outage line. So, and you'll get status updates on that line as we get information up. But in a big event, we assume in first case that when the circuit's up, everybody's up, but you might be part of a smaller outage somewhere along that circuit. So the 21 hours, I think, is just the extent of the damage we ran into, but I'll let somebody else deal with that one if you need more detail.
Yeah, I think that probably addressed it.
And without knowing the specific issue, I think if it was 21 hours of, if it was during Landon, that probably wasn't, I mean, that was less than the average.
That should be a hallelujah.
Right.
No, so, we get that, and thank you to individuals for submitting that. The last question we have, and from one of our own members here, I do not believe she's here today, but some of the items I want to highlight as we continue this conversation related to communications, accessibility, technological barriers for vulnerable communities and customer service overall. These topics have come up as points of concern in past meetings. I want to make sure that we give ourselves the time and space to explore solutions, which is what we hope to do today. So if we can find a way to address some, if not all of these, I truly believe it would improve the public perception of MLGW. So, thank you for that input. Is there any comment on that? Or I think that's what we're going to be doing here shortly. So, any other questions or comments before we roll into the video? Yes, sir. Hold on.
You may have covered this before, but could you describe maybe in a few minutes what kind of reporting system, internal reporting systems are inside MLGW, meaning how much reliance do you have on individual customers to report outages versus how much do you know that's happening when it happens? Meaning, are there chips, is there digital technology on circuitry that tells you when things are happening, or is it pretty much a reliance on the phone to ring and you go from there?
All right, Alonzo, that's you. Is your volunteer on?
Get feedback. So we get information several different ways. When a circuit goes out, our supervisory control and data acquisition system then codes everybody on that circuit as being out. Okay, so that's a gross way of getting the numbers, but it's not necessarily individual calling, and the individual calls and verifies that most of the time. So that's one way. We have smart meters, not the best way at this point. Customer can call in, and that system works very, very well. If you call in and the outage reporting line, and it can take a high volume of calls. That data comes in. If it's something less than a circuit, say for instance, if we get 5 customers in an area that are out, but they happen to be on different transformers, we can say, okay, they're on a fuse stack. We will refer everybody on that fuse stack is out. So not everybody is called, but the system will infer the others as being out because you've gotten outages on several different areas that are off that same tap. That makes sense to you? So we are moving towards distribution automation.
It's not highly technological, though.
Right. It's not quite that sophisticated. It is an inference engine that takes in data and infers the type of outage we're seeing out there. That's pretty
Are there systems that do that are out in the world that have better technology that
There may be.
doesn't report?
There may be. We'll investigate that further. A lot of it depends on what you have in the individual customer home and the data, being able to get that data back. And that's the challenge we have with the smart meters, is that when we have so much of our infrastructure that's damaged, the communication infrastructure for getting that data question.
All right, thank you.
Real quick too, Brian, I'm sorry, regarding the distribution automation piece, just to mention that, Steve, for you and for others, just a reminder, and I know when Alonzo talked about our 5-year service improvement plan, he probably covered the distribution automation piece. But just to remind everyone, that is a incredibly important piece of our improvement system, because if we could wave a wand today and have all of the distribution automation deployed, and Don Roberts is back here, he can talk circles around me about distribution automation, but if we had all of that deployed today, you would see an incredible improvement in terms of restoration from outages, whether it's a car hitting a pole, those things. Now, when we've got an obliteration of infrastructure and poles laying on the ground and all of that, well, but in your typical normal situations where you may have lightning strike something and you've still got the infrastructure up, but you've got a little bit of an equipment outage, the distribution automation system, self-healing networks will do things much quicker with less labor required, and customers will notice the impact. And so that's something that at the prior utility where I work, that we rolled out, and we could see an almost immediate impact once that happened. That is in the plan, and those devices are being rolled out. Don, I don't know if you want to add anything to just talk about automation in general, or is that enough? If you want to come up, if you're going to add something, you need to come up and do that. This is Don's world, so he may get a little wound up about this, but y'all hang in there with him.
What's the tab for that?
Oh, 50 million? 130 million, grab it, Mike. 130 million is in the budget for that.
Yeah, the distribution automation system that we're trying to develop is one of the 5 different points on the 5-year capital plan that we're engaged in, an overall goal, and we believe it's within reach and that we will be successful if we're successful in implementing all of the components, is to reduce the customer's outage time by 50%. Now, one of the biggest components is the automation system. And the phase that we're in, we're trying to get 1,100 automated switches up on our distribution system, and we're targeting the worst performing circuits. The way that this works is there's communications between the switches. It uses artificial intelligence in order to determine where the damage is on the system, and then automatically switches to isolate that damage. And that's what we do now with manpower. We send troublemen out to find the damage, and then we come up with a switching plan that restores power. That usually takes an hour and a half. This will, number one, a lot of the switches will prevent customers from seeing interruptions at all. But in the artificial intelligence component, when we get that operational, it will restore the power. That's where the self-healing name comes from. So we're looking forward to having that on the system, and we also see other benefits that we can get from this system in terms of data. We plow back on where the load is growing, where we have power quality issues, and so forth. So we're real excited to get to this grid modernization. So,
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am, I'll come back to you. Okay, thank you.
I just had a follow-up question. I was here when we switched from the traditional meter to the smart meter, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was so that it provided input back to MLGW when that individual power lost, or house lost power. Is that, so when MLGW loses, let's say, don't, from a particular individual's house,
Yeah,
does
Jim
that
West,
not?
Jim West, he'll help us answer that.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yes,
so I
ma'am,
don't
no,
know.
thank you.
That is correct. The smart meter does allow MLGW to, what we call ping it, to just see if that meter will, can we communicate to it, get a signal back. That tells us it's live. The scale of the event in February was so massive that it actually took down our communications infrastructure to those meters. So we weren't able to communicate over our radio system to those meters because we had so much damage across the system. We're looking at ways to mitigate that since the February ice storm event. I mentioned that a minute ago. So we have started now as we've had some outage events since, not at that same scale we saw with Winter Storm Landon, but pinging those meters. And then if we don't get a response back, then we're digging in to make sure that that location was actually out, or was there something else in the communication system that prevented us from reaching that meter. So yes, we completed the smart meter implementation just over a year ago, so at the end of 2020. And February was really the only really big event we've had since the project was completed. So we learned a lot in that we'll be building on. But you're absolutely right. That's one of the advantages to advanced meter system is that you get that real-time status check.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And there are multiple technologies in smart meters, and that's not uncommon that when you have a outage event this large, that it knocks down your central communication, so therefore you lose some of that feedback. But certainly in a more routine, because certainly what was this, one of the 3 largest in history of MLGW or something. In a more routine event, that is extremely helpful. But when you lose it, the majority it takes out that system, it loses a little bit of that value. And certainly, the question up here with distribution automation will then pick up some of that, as it's not like a house, but out there more in the center where it's feeding out. I can give you an example. I live on Nashville Electric Services system, and they knew our power was out, they knew everybody in our neighborhood's power was out, they knew everybody in the neighborhood across the street's power was out. So you know all of that, but you don't know what caused it to go out necessarily. And so that's when it requires boots on the ground. And certainly I know this video is going to get into some of that. And fortunately or unfortunately, I jumped in the car and had to go somewhere as my power was out. And I saw a very large pine bough going across 3 phases of power, and so it had created that fault. And so, to MLGW, they know your power's out, they don't know what's necessarily caused it all the way down to that level. Did a tree break the pole or pull the power lines down? And in this case, it was very simple. It's a 15-minute set up the truck, pull the pine branch off, but there's no damage to the conductor nor the poles. But you just don't know that. And certainly in the case of an ice storm, it is an extreme case. So, question in the back.
Are you Brian?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Solte, I have maybe a stupid question. I've lived in 6 countries and 7 states. My name is Michael Warren Gates. And I've lived off and on in Memphis for 13 years, so it isn't like I'm just here yesterday. But my question is, where's your wind turbines? Where are your solar panels? I know you got a few across from Arbors and down by the Shelby Farms at the Agri Center. But, most cities have these implications, and even some have solar roads. Utah has those. That's really my question. I guess it's a 3-part question.
Yes, sir. I'm going to take this.
Did you ask where our wind turbines?
Yeah, where are your wind?
We don't have wind turbines, so yeah, and also you may know with regards to wind, you do have to have a certain profile for wind generation, right? And so this community doesn't have that. So that's one thing.
Miles per hour is all you need.
Well, but for consistency, and then the other thing is, of course, we remain today, I say today, a full requirements customer of Tennessee Valley Authority, who provides our full requirements for power supply. Now, the scope of these discussions here has to do with our distribution system, which we talked about in our first meeting. So we're really not discussing the how we get power into Memphis. That's really beyond the scope of what we're covering today. But certainly we'll be glad to offline talk with you more about those kinds of questions, because they're good questions, and you may be aware we've got an evaluation going on right now to evaluate the power supply, and it is inclusive of things like renewable energy and those kinds of things, and big portions. So we'll be glad to cover that with you offline. Thank you.
All right, so with that, I see no further at this time. We will roll the video.
When the city is under a severe weather watch, our MLGW crews are always prepared and ready to go.
Our first thing we do is we monitor the weather constantly to make sure when the timeline is going to hit and try to determine the severity of the damage. Next, we communicate to our personnel to be prepared to work 16-hour shift starting X day. Then we also beef up or add additional resources if need be based on the predictions. We get the trucks ready, fueled up, we check our material supplies, just make sure everything's ready to go so as soon as it hits we can dispatch crews ASAP.
What a troubleshooter is he's gone through the process of MLGW's apprenticeship training to become a lineman. So all of our troubleshooters have at least 5 years experience with all of the systems at MLGW, be that underground, overhead electric transmission. A troubleshooter will be the first person they see on that job because somebody has to go out there and figure out what caused that damage. No crew will respond to a call, an electric call at MLGW until the troubleshooter's already been there and assess that scene.
Through rain and hail, snow and ice, straight line winds and tornadoes, MLGW linemen are always ready to restore your power.
Basically, what we would do to prepare our crews on the day of an event or an upcoming event, or we would really have a staff meeting with my staff. I have four general foremen under me. So what I would do is relay the information to my general foreman. We would call a meeting with our crews, and we would inform them that we have a storm coming through and that they may have to work 16-hour days. Everybody can't do this job. This is a job that you can't call the police department, you can't call the fire department, you can't call anyone to restore power but us. And this is something that we went through a 4.5-year apprenticeship program for, to prepare ourselves for this. I knew that at that time we had been trained. It's not so much as what you do during the storm, it's what you do before that storm hit, meaning the days that you're working your regular routine maintenance and things of that nature, learning how to work that maintenance in a timely fashion when it's on a good day, when it's a dry day. So therefore, when that storm hit, we've already been prepared. We don't have to prepare when the storm hit. We're already prepared because we prepare every day before the storm hits.
When the lights go out, so do they.
But what happens during the storm, guys are geared up. They know that there's a possibility that we may have a lot of customers out. So the guys are geared up, as well as myself, the management staff. We all are geared up for that. And it really puts them in that mindset of it's time for us to show up and show out.
Linemen are often some of the hardest working and most overlooked workers in America. But in the midst of an outage crisis, all eyes are on them.
The ultimate goal during outages is to restore the utilities, restore power as soon as possible, but also in the safest manner. We want to make sure that we restore power safely. There may be power lines down. We have to make sure that our guys are working in safe conditions. We have to make sure they have the equipment, their personal protection equipment. We have to make sure that all our trucks are running efficiently. We want to also make sure that we're doing it in a timely manner where we're efficient. And we're also making sure that that our customers get their power back on as soon as possible.
Yeah, our linemen are well trained. Not everyone can be a lineman. That's why not everyone is in this profession. They have to be mentally tough and physically tough. During a storm event, that is when we get an opportunity to show out, and it is our game time, so to speak. So our guys are really fired up and prepped and ready to go to get and serve our customers to get the power back on.
In the dead of a crippling winter storm, if your power goes out, it's the linemen that work through the day and night to get your lights and heat back on.
If you haven't had a chance to say hello to good morning, I will tell you that I've got a treat for you today. It's going to be very, very brief what I'm going to talk about. I'm coming in a little hot. Thank you. It's going to be very brief what I'm going to talk to you about. But first of all, I want to recognize our corporate communications group for pulling together that video they put together over the past few weeks after your request. We couldn't get the crews in here because it seems like every time we have this thing, it's a storm. So we did get the video with the field management. And some of the members of field management aren't here. Cliff Eberry, who's the Vice President of Design, Construction, and Delivery, is seated in the back. Good. Brad, who is, he's got his autograph booth outside. Brad Gates, who's the manager of electric distribution. And we've got Greg Deaton, who's the manager of our contractor resources. And other members of our staff are here to answer various questions. So the main thing I want to talk about today is tree trimming. Okay? We've talked a lot about tree trimming and trees and the interaction of our lines with trees and why we have these various conflicts and what MLGW tries to do to prevent these various conflicts. There is a tree trimming policy. And one of the reasons that I'll have a presentation today is because the tree trimming policy is online. So if you ever want to look at it and some of our other practices and policies and preparations around storms, our corporate communications department does an excellent job of putting things online and resources where the customer can actually get to them and find out the various practices that we do out in the field. So our tree trimming policy is there. It is online. The scope is to provide guidelines and ensure that we provide reliable service. Our line clearance department has had this policy in accordance with the Shelby County Tree Trimming Ordinance of number 93 from 1992, and the Natural Electric Safety Code. And basically what you can find in this policy is how far we trim around our lines. You can find the, which is 10 feet on a single phase line, each side, 15 feet on each side on a 3-phase line. And on secondary, it's, trim on secondary? 5 feet, 5 feet on secondary. Which is, don't think I talked a whole lot about secondary. So secondary would be, with the primary lines, what's right on the top of the pole. If you see 3 lines just underneath that, that's going to be the secondary line. And it runs from pole to pole, not necessarily to your house. The service drop is what runs through your house. And it's basically the same voltage as the secondary, but that's a different set of lines as far as what we trim. So the secondary is trimmed at 5 feet. And the voltage difference is going to be, 12 kV for the primary and 240 for the secondary. So 240 volts. Huh? 23 kV. Yeah, 12 and 23 kV on the primary and 240 on the secondary. So that's how that's set up. In our previous meetings, I have said that we have an arborist on staff. I'm in error. We did have an arborist on staff. The arborist retired. So we have not replaced an arborist. We have somebody that's on staff that's, of course, is supervising those tree trimming crews and has been with the department for several years and worked under the arborist. One of the things you've mentioned is us adding additional arborist resources, and that's something we will definitely look at. We have looked at it in the past, and it's been a difficult hurdle to get over with our contracting process and bonding and insurance requirements and that sort of thing. But it's something we would consider in the future based on the feedback we got from this group. So there you go. Scroll on up, please. So once again, this is kind of what we're talking about. And it talks about what's a volunteer tree versus a planted tree. We tend to get rid of volunteer trees and brush. Keep going. So this is a sign that shows the primaries on top, and this is a view of primary and secondary. Then you have the cable TV lines. We get a lot of calls around communication lines being down and being low. Customers not sure whether or not it's safe. Continue to call us about them, but sometimes it is a communications line that's actually in the space that you're talking about that's down low and looks dangerous. We do send a notification to customers, and we have a tree trimming cycle that we talked about as a 3-year cycle. We do have a trade-a-tree or tree replacement program. Customer agrees and signs an agreement saying such. We will replace the tree that's in our right of way with a tree that won't have conflict with our power lines. And that's a good program. Gets a nice tree. Encourage customers to take advantage of that. Keep going. So it has the definitions in it. Once again, all of this is online at MLGW.com. So Greg, anything to add, sir? Greg they're going to have questions for you, Greg. I'm just going to tell you that, right? Because you're the one to answer. Yes.
Is this on a 3-year cycle for different areas of the city?
All over the city.
All at the same time you do it? I mean, what I'm saying is, you do one area, and then 3 years later, that area is done, another area the next year, and then so it's this cycle.
Right.
Okay, and when was the last time this was done?
When was the last time we were?
Yeah, are you on a cycle right now? Is there areas you're tree trimming right now? 'Cause I know it's been over 3 years.
We tree trim every year.
We're behind every cycle.
Take the mic and answer.
I'm sorry.
So, yes, we are behind on the cycle. So we've got some areas that may not have been trimmed since 2017, or just a few of those. So we're trying to add additional resources so that we can get on that 3-year cycle. Years ago, we had a different set. We were on a hybrid cycle years ago, but we went to a 3-year cycle. We've not been successful due to resources. We're trying to resolve that now.
As far as just because the budget was cut, on the budget cut in 2019,
No, we've actually added dollars to the budget.
Yeah.
In the last few years.
Our tree trimming issue is around resources, getting people in to work the tree trimming cycle to the 3-year goal that we have. We're looking at various contracts and contractors around that. May make some changes, suggestions around that, but we're going to get to the 3-year cycle. One of the things that we've seen in Landon, as we looked at like sectors, one sector next to another sector, one sector that had been tree trimmed versus a sector that had not been tree trimmed, and we saw about a 20% difference in the number of outages. So the tree trimming is very important to reducing the number of outages. Yes,
Mr. Warren Lonzo, thank you. 2 questions. Number 1, how many local vendors do we have that work in the tree trimming process? And the second part of the question, is there a vendor development program that would qualify more local vendors to be in the cycle?
So our tree trimming, one is there's a certain amount of certification that's done around being able to work around power lines. Our tree trimming contracts are with national organizations and international organizations that do tree trimming on a very large scale, specifically for utilities. Now they have the flexibility to do some contracting with local groups. And in the past they have done a little bit of that, but it's mainly with 2 major providers, that's Aspen and ABC, and Aspen's like the largest tree trimming outfit in the world. Now, when we look at local, I think we've looked at local before. That's been, once again, the national firms have a problem getting people. Local firms have a problem getting people too. Yes.
Wes Hopper here, and I hope I don't start to ramble here.
I'm gonna take a chair. Take your time.
Okay. First of all, you had mentioned hiring contractors to consult with MLGW and kind of like be a liaison between the customers and Memphis Light Gas and Water. When I was the contractor that you were referring to, just so the public knows. As far as my role with the Mid-South and actually the state of Tennessee, we mentioned education earlier. I do teach the Certified Arbors Study course. It's based on the International Society of Arboriculture Standards. With the utility side of pruning, there is a qualification called the Utility Arbors Certification that is available, and most of your utility tree trimmers do have that qualification, as well as the tree climber safety certification. Not all arborists are certified, although there are a lot of qualified arborists out there. But in order to work around these utility wires, it does require a specific skill. It is totally illegal for any other arborist to work within the 10 feet of the utility line. So that's very important to know for the consumer when they hire professionals to work on their trees. There was mention on the action items, the incentive to cut trees, for the consumer to rely on MLGW to trim their trees. I feel like that it would be important to allow Memphis Light Gas and Water to save the consumer, the customer dollars by allowing Memphis Light Gas and Water to remove the trees that they have to work on. That would eliminate a lot of the power outages that the Shelby County has during these heavy storms. And also, I don't know how Memphis Light Gas and Water's services to prevent power outages compared to like the utility companies on the East Coast or up north where they have more power outages due to the storms than Shelby County does. I'd like to see some of those comparisons if they have been made, which I'm sure they have. And we need more of the customers to give Memphis Light Gas and Water permission to work on their trees. We have a lot of people in Shelby County that refuse to let Memphis Light Gas and Water in their yards to work on the trees. They should allow them on their properties to take care of the utilities. That's the biggest issue that I have seen with the public. Not everyone agrees with the way that utility pruning is performed, but you can't compare utility pruning to regular arboriculture standards. There's totally different types of pruning and removal standards. If we can just get that message sent out to the public as far as that goes, that would be very important. I am an arborist. I love trees. I plant lots of trees, but you have to plant the right tree in the right spot. And what was mentioned earlier about in the previous conversation was that a lot of these trees are volunteers. We love volunteer trees. It's part of our canopy that we have here in the city. But if they're interfering with utilities, then they don't belong there. It's either electricity or the trees. If we have a tree removed in your yard, some of the ordinances, I've read almost every city ordinance in the state of Tennessee and compared it to ours. In Germantown, if we remove a tree with a development or with utilities, then it has to be replaced inch for inch. For example, if you remove a tree that's 24 inches in diameter, you have to replace it with 8 3-inch caliber trees to continue with that tree canopy coverage in the city. Right now, Memphis is at a 32% canopy coverage. We like to maintain that 32%. So you compare the trees that we lose during a storm, it's no different than when we have a development and we have to clear out 50 acres of trees to put in pavement and buildings, like the Ford Motor Company when it's coming in. They're going to cut down a lot of trees to build that facility. Well, how are they going to replace that canopy? When they clear out a parking lot, a forest to build houses for a new subdivision, who says anything about that canopy that's disappeared? But it's only, the public only gets upset when they have white gas and water coming in trying to protect their utilities. So if we can just educate the public on how necessary it is to have the trees removed within the easement of those utilities, we can go a long ways to avoid the power outages. Thank you.
Thank you. And he does not work for us. That staff is going like, who is this guy?
Jason Farmer, BLP Film Studios, Whitehaven. Thank you for those comments. I guess just to kind of follow through on those, I'll toss the ball to Councilwoman Robinson to see, like, is there any coordination, like you mentioned, the fact that other municipalities have plans that may be more robust than what we have here in the city of Memphis. So are there is there a process where we could adapt the best practices from other communities to make our system here more efficient? Particularly as it relates to, and this may be for you, Doug, as well, is there current policy that will give light, gas, and water or the city of Memphis right of way to remove trees that are an impediment to the electrical process?
So there is current standards, and that's one of the things we're looking at is to say, is it adequate for the purposes here? And I think certainly through this process, elevating this conversation, because typically in our community, the conversation is about how do we get rid of the blight, what kind of code enforcement we do. I mentioned before, get rid of the junky cars, clean up the yards, the tall weeds, and largely we've been focused on a lot of that. We haven't really been focused on, are we holding people accountable for the trees that are interfering? Well, these recent storms and outages have really elevated the conversation. So we may have rules on the books, but they may not be the highest priority for us. Well, we're elevating that in priority. So what we will do is look at the adequacy of the ordinances that we have in place. We will examine what other cities have and to see if there's anything more. You know, I'll be honest, I didn't know we had a tree replacement program. I know I know a little bit about a lot of things. I had no idea we had a tree replacement program. I didn't know what Germantown, if you move 24, you got to put 8 3-inch trees in. So we can look at all of those things. If this is important to this group, we will elevate that discussion with our city code enforcement officials, coordinate with MLGW, and perhaps we can put together, like we've done before, a coordinated plan. We're not going to be able to do it all over the city at one time, but we can certainly start sector by sector, get us on a program, and elevate the discussion about, in our community. I think it was a really good point. The homeowners didn't care that we cut down a bunch of trees to build their house, but now that their house is there, they don't want to cut down the tree that serves the energy. So it's a great point. It's something that I already had down from, I think, the second meeting someone brought that up. So it's certainly we have to look at the adequacy, and then where do we put that on priority for our code enforcement guys to get out there and do this. But we can't do it without just conveying to people that this is going to get elevated priority for us. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's certainly something we'll have a discussion about in city council if we need to change the ordinance.
Thank you, Doug, and I apologize, Councilman Robinson, for filing to the wrong side of the court.
Certainly, Dr. Rand. Well, actually, heading toward the comment that was made is that it is illegal, as in against the law, to have a tree trimmer work within 10 feet of a power line. And is that correct, what you said? And does that apply to the single line coming into the house as well?
No, the service line is the responsibility of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the service line coming from the pole to the house is the responsibility of the property owner to have it cleared. Most of your, I'm not going to speak for all of them, but most of your tree trimmers, currently they're in the Memphis area, come from the utility, they're ones that are performing residential tree care. They come from the utility part of the tree trimming. They move in with ABC Tree Service, Ashland, and they make more money working independently, so they end up moving into the residential still have to have that utility Arbors certification to be allowed to work within that 10 feet of the utility wires. Now, that's what Memphis Light, Gas, and Water had told me. I ran a tree service for 26 years. I've been in the industry for 39. And have I hit a power line? Yeah, it's not a fun thing to have happen. Have I seen people burn up getting too close to the power line? Yes, I have. Is there training to work in the areas specifically for utility wires? Yeah, just like it is for the people that climb the poles and install the utility lines, initially. Yeah. Going back to the part about tree removals within the subdivision and putting some of the responsibilities back on the neighborhoods. A lot of subdivisions have HOAs, neighborhood associations, where there's multiple people in the neighborhood. Let's say there's 100 people within the subdivision, and it's a forested subdivision. When I was meeting in Orange Mound, and I want to talk about the southern part of Memphis, where I was born, I lived on Pennsylvania Street. When I was speaking to the group in Orange Mound about the hazard trees, the old trees that just reached the peak of their age, I love these big old trees, but you got one that's 6 feet in diameter and it's gone through so many storms, and the neighbors are afraid of it and everybody else is afraid of it. I recommended, and maybe this is something that the city could help with these areas, with our maybe the city council or whomever, to come together as a group, apply for a grant to hire a certified arborist to come through, do a neighborhood inspection, somebody that doesn't have a dog in the fight, somebody that's not going to be trying to get all this tree work, and have that HOA apply for a government grant to assist them with having the trees trimmed or worked on within their HOA. There's lots of subdivisions in the Shelby County area that do need financial help. So I think if we rely on what the government offers as far as these grants to help with these communities would be a great benefit.
We have a couple questions back here, then we want to go break after these two questions.
Yes. I'm Mark Brown from the city of Bartlett. But one of the things we've done is, well, first of all, like Gas and Water, when they're going to do trees in Bartlett, I've asked them to notify me. We put the maps up on our website where they're going to be. Probably not, it may not be a great idea, but, I have the people that are affected call me, and then I go out with like Gas and Water, we negotiate tree replacements, that kind of stuff. I don't know that I would recommend that for everybody, but that's the way it's been working. But since that came about, we've established new in our landscaping requirements for developments. We now don't allow trees that are going to grow up within that power line structure, so that helps. We've had trees we had to take down that were trees that we required in our landscaping of the development. So we've had the guys say, hey, y'all told me to put this tree up. Now you're not going to make me replace it, are you? So that, we used a little bit of common sense there. And then during the ice storm, I went out and talked to some of the supervisors from Light, Gas, and Water who were watching these tree cutters. And these were trees that the homeowners put in after they moved in there, and they were right in the power lines. So we need to do a better job of communicating to people. Don't put that pine tree 3 feet from the power line. So those are all good things that you mentioned somehow, working on ordinances and requirements and stuff. Those are all good things that we're working on, but we need to communicate to our community, this is the impact of putting that tree there. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay, we'll take one more question, then we'll take a quick break.
Thank you. A lot of good ideas, and I like those, but one of the things that it kind of keeps coming back to me is that no matter what we do, we have a labor problem. We have folks that don't really want to do this job. I've talked to some landscape developers, and they're not interested in doing work very much. So I guess my point is that is there a way that we can come up with some creative ideas to help consent folks to, I like the term finger development, right? I mean, I'm not really suggesting that MLGW hire everybody because that's expensive, but maybe there's a way to get some of our landscape companies that within the city or the metropolitan area who have no interest in participating in the program, we didn't send them to do that.
The service fund request.
Yeah, that sounds like a good segue to what we're going to be talking about later with regards to solutions. I do think Steve's got one question. Let's take Angelica, if you can get up.
Thank you. How did you come up with a 10-foot right-of-way? And could one of the solutions be to expand that? So if you expanded it 5 feet, then you've got 30 instead of 20. So it might help in your tree trimming, expand that easement area. Another question is related to, have y'all done any research on what weight of a tree it takes to take a line down? So, in other words, does an oak limb that's 10 feet over a line take down a line, I think pines are lighter weight than oaks, and it would think to follow that MLGW should have a list of trees that are verboten, no pines, no junk trees, no things that grow fast that can get over a line and take down your power. And I think, we could talk to the arborists out there, but it seems like that you may be trimming a tree ad infinitum. In other words, you're continuing to work in the 10-foot, and all the tree is doing is getting taller and weighs more. Therefore, it's going to take down your power, versus thinking through it a little bit more and saying, okay, maybe we need to take the weight of the tree down inside the tree rather than keep pruning on the outside. The tree is continuing to grow on the inside and way more. So those are just some thoughts on, maybe expanding. And I think from an aesthetic point of view, and I'd be interested in Wes's comments. He made a comment that tree trimming for a utility is different than for a residential person. So why is that, and what is the difference? Those are a lot of big. Maybe we take a break.
Go ahead and take Mike Steve to here real quick, then we'll take a break, because I do want to address your first part of your question around the standards and why 10 feet. And there are standards associated with that. It's not just an MLGW standard per se. When tree trim around power lines, there are standards. Do you want to address that, Wes, or do you want the issue around the clearance issue? And it has to do with voltage, I'm sure. Or do we want one of our folks? We got Brad or whoever here might want to address that.
It may be because it's the recorded easement when it fits this structure.
It has a lot to do with the point of contact. We don't want to get electrocuted. So, you take someone that doesn't have the training to work around the utilities, they may not be observant of their rope or their pole pruner or their pole saw that they're using in the tree that's just, happens to accidentally touch the pole because they were looking at the other direction.
That's trying to get closer, not farther away.
Yeah, but it happens. I mean, so you gotta have some basic standards to.
I mean, if it was 15, would it not be safer than 10?
Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely be safer. And you had mentioned something about the type of pruning that, why is utility pruning different than the regular arboriculture standards? The American National Standards Institute, ANSI standards, has the standards that apply to regular arboriculture's pruning that are not involved with utilities, and standards that are involved when you pruning away from the utility wires. So it may not look right, but it's either trees or electricity, and we have to avoid these high power outages. Does that make sense? Am I getting close to answering your question on that?
Well, I think what I'm hearing him say is that should we make the distance further?
That's one thing. Yes, make the distance further.
you know, to be honest with you, I tell you what, right now, I'll take, if we can get the 10-foot trimming done on the cycle we need, I'd be grateful to the Lord on that. Greg, do you want to address
Yeah, I
that?
was going to speak to the.
You want to come up, Greg, so we can see you?
I was going to speak to the easement, the 10-foot and 15-foot. I don't know the origin of that because we've had it for so long. But I suspect that the National Electric Safety Code had something to do with that. So, but again, we've had it as long as I've been here and many years before that. Don might be able to speak to that, but I suspect it came from the National.
And I will say that back in my day of doing engineering work, that's consistent. So it's not just MLGW. That I've seen that in terms of other companies. Let me say real quick, because we're about to take a break, and I'll turn it over to you, Brian. But one last point about, before I forget this, I think that's really important, and I think we've touched on this. But from a homeowner perspective, when we talk about trees, Doug and I were talking about this a minute ago, but just remember, and this is important to share with your neighbors and others, the tree might be in your property, and it's certainly beautiful, and we are doing every day the balance around trying to preserve the beauty and make sure we maintain reliability. But when we talk about power lines, with the exception of the service drop to your home, if it's another power line that's traversing your property where that tree is interacting, it's not just serving you. That power line serves hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000 other people. So the real important thing to remember is everyone has to kind of think differently, just like you might say, and I think Doug would agree, there are certain standards and policies that we have within the communities that is governing kind of how we take care of our property and what we can and can't dump and all that. That's because it impacts more than just that homeowner. The visual of it might just be at that location, but the actual impact goes well beyond that. So we just need to, as we formulate solutions and start talking about that for the last hour, let's just keep that in mind, that it's really important for everybody to be engaged. It's a all, not just one, to keep in mind. But Brian, you want to tell us, give us how many minutes we got?
Yeah, and I'll wrap up. And your point, I think you're exactly right. However, for every customer of MLGW who's willing to let you trim back to 15, there's another one out there who may pull a gun and say, you're not going to touch my tree. This is my grandfather planted this tree. In these kind of situations, I know when I managed a utility, we cut down about a 6-inch pecan tree that was just starting to grow and was underneath the power lines. And then there was an editorial where they claimed we cut down a $36,000 pecan tree and wanted the utility to give them $36,000. So for everybody who wants it for the reason of, better power, there's someone else who has a reason why they don't want their tree cut. So not disagreeing with your idea and suggestion, but implementing that is much more challenging. So if we could take a quick break and come back at 10:25, I think that would, or 10:30, sorry, yeah.
For the cost of the jobs that I mentioned earlier, like we can direct someone to.
Yeah, Jim is, or Martrice, do you want to come address what's happening with that? We had a question earlier about the job posting for call center positions, and I want Martrice to share with you all what's happening with that. Martrice Anderson, Director of Customer Service.
Good morning. So there are not any currently posted. We just had some part-time and full-time service advisor positions that were posted on MLGW.com. Those positions, I believe, came down last week. But when we do have them, they go on to MLGW.com and we have current openings, and they're listed there. We likely will have some more go up internally, and once we go through the internal process, if we don't find any candidates, they'll go outside. We actually just had it come down.
All right, thank you for that.
Yes, I think we're good to go whenever you're ready.
All right, so again, thank you all for getting back in here timely for us. So yeah, this is a time where we're trying to get towards solutions so then we can come back at our next meeting and with cost analysis of what these solutions would be to implement so we can make a better informed decision. Certainly taking down all of the trees would eliminate a tree causing an outage. I mean, look at Kansas. It's not very pretty. It's not what we want. So there's a fine line in between the two of them as to what that would be, and it requires a partnership between the city and the utility. And certainly, the standards in one city in the suburb may be different than the standard of the the city of Memphis. So these are things to evaluate and to consider. So at this point, we're looking for you to help provide this input and feedback. And I will be moving around with the mic, or if you want to help me. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. My question goes back to smart meters. Listen to that part of it. They just in place, and it just disturbed me that right after we finished putting that in place, the communication part of it failed. Okay. Did we make a bad decision on which meters or provider? Did the vendor that was providing those overpromise and underdeliver? The communication system we had in place to ping those and talk to them. Do we have an adequate backbone structure in place to deal with that? Again, that's the biggest thing came up, or the third largest we had in history, and it failed. So, what are we doing to fix that?
So when we say the communication piece failed, if you ever drive around town and look around, you'll see that we have on our street lights, you'll see these devices on the top of some. They're gatekeepers that help with our collection process. Well, when you have an outage and the entire circuit goes down, those street lights are also down. If the street light is down, then that gatekeeper is down. So the device, the meter itself is there, it's able to function. What happens, there's also an outage on that gatekeeper from that street light. So part of our process we're reviewing is determining where that backbone system, those street lights that have those gatekeepers on them, where they belong in the restoration process, so we can get that meter data back, is part of what we're working on now. But the devices themselves didn't fail. It's just they have an outage also.
All right, other input. Don't be quiet on us now. It's now what we need. Right, in the back.
I just wanted to encourage MLGW to work towards that 3-year cycle on tree trimming. I'm a former utility guy, for those of you who know me, and that's the most single important thing I think that you can do to improve not only your impact of these storms, but also the day-to-day reliability statistics as well. So keep pushing whatever you have to do to get to that 3-year cycle. One other thing on tree replacement, Joe over there mentioned the tree canopy. I work for a utility in Missouri, and we took that tree replacement to another level and really tried to look for opportunities as a community to plant trees on public lands or wherever we could. We had a long-range goal to maintain or increase that tree canopy in the community in spite of our tree trimming efforts. And that helps with public relations too as well.
Thank you. I'm Scott McCormick. Going back to the devices on the street lights, I've noticed if, the police department will put temporary cameras up in parking lots where, around Christmas time when there's crime like to take place, and they have little solar panels on them that I'm assuming is operating that camera. Is there not a system on those devices at the top that would have a little panel be attached and could be a backup when the power to the pole goes out?
You want a chair up here? We'll bring you a chair. Just take that one right next to Ms. Anderson.
So we haven't looked at putting that panel on top of the pole again. If you put a panel on top of a pole on top of a gatekeeper, you're going to have to deal with issues with lightning strikes, having a higher source of.
It wouldn't be very big.
So we'll have to look and see how much power is required for those to see if there's some backup power source that we could have for some of those around town, and we can definitely look at exploring that.
It's a good thought. And the other question that I would have based on that, though, Scott, good point, is that what they're doing is powering, I think, those units, and what we're doing is actually communicating. So there may be two different things there. It may not be an issue of power, but I don't know. We definitely got that noted, right, Erica? We got that noted.
Of course, if it was iced over,
right?
Probably
but that's a good point in terms of alternate ways, basically alternate ways for functionality of those devices that don't depend on what went out when we had the problem.
Certainly a redundancy feature.
Good point.
Back here.
Good morning, Darren Sanders. I'm with Shelby County. And we have the same difficulties and challenges that MLGW has with access to properties. And I was just kind of curious if they've employed any drone technology or looked at those opportunities for not only inspecting, the systems, during the normal year, but also during an outage to expedite, assessment of damage and that sort of thing. We've used some drone technology for surveying in areas that were difficult to get to and have had some success with it. So just curious to see what y'all's position is on that.
Did you say drones?
Run time.
Yeah, have we, and I don't know if Brad or Don, somebody want to address that, want to come up, Brad? Yeah, come on up, Brad, talk about that.
Yeah, I'm Brad Gates. We have used drones very little. We did it for a transmission outage during this storm landing event, and it worked out really well. So we're looking at possibility of doing it for the distribution side as well. But yeah, we had a line outage, and it found the outage just like that. It's in a territory we couldn't walk to, so it was really helpful to use that new technology to get us to where we needed to go to make those repairs. So yeah, we are looking at that. We do have a contract for transmission, like I said, but distribution we do not yet.
Hey, Mr. Smith, thank you.
Real quick, kind of going back to the question of communication, have you looked at using commercial carriers for backup or leveraging that for communication? I know MPD uses SkyCom, and they use commercial carriers for communicating from the real-time crime center to their SkyCom cameras. And with smart meters, you be able to use kind of the same infrastructure. If nothing else, is a complementary infrastructure to the internal one that you have.
Yeah, great point, and I think we'll take that down as a note to consider, but I mean, Martrice, if you want to talk about it, that's fine, but I think this is good, these are good suggestions. You good? Okay, she's good. I told you, get your chair over here.
All right, other questions?
Or thoughts or suggestions, this is good.
We got her in the chair. Now you're not going to ask questions. Who's next? Anybody, other suggestions, comments? Certainly there's, yes ma'am, come your way.
Hello, I'm Ruth from the Fraser area, and my concern is when the lines break and, you got them laying on the line up on the ground. I'm a survivor of my neighbor, and we had to walk out, and it was dark, absolutely dark, and you had to, you could hear and all of this and the power lines. So wondering with this, what is it, NIA plan or something, is there any way you can shut the power off? Because that will kill you if you step on those lines. It's wet and you can't see, and that's a concern. Also, for tree trimming, Commissioner Robinson over there, I had a friend, and she was living over there off of Decatur. Another friend that worked in the program told her, call, you can get your tree cut back. So she called and said, oh, good, I'm gonna call. Well, what it was uptown, and they had a tip. And part of that tip was to do that, for that, the people in that area was to cut their trees back. So this is something that would help, I think.
Thank you, ma'am.
I guess I'm on the level for a quick question. When I look at the infrastructure investment plan, it seems that the grid modernization, we're kind of less than 10%, down that path. We're 2 years into the plan. So is there a way to accelerate that? Because knowing that that's probably got some of the biggest bang for your buck, if you will, in terms of return on investment.
Yes, that's a great point. I had not written down yet, but the acceleration of the 5-year plan is something we definitely need to consider. And what we need to think about is how to make that happen. What aspects of it can we accelerate or not? What the cost will be and all that. But that's absolutely good input.
communications department on communicating during the last outage. You know, I think they effectively use social media. Gail was on almost every day, Facebook Live, just news stories that were covered. One of the things, and also I'm a retiree of the MLGW, so I've worked there for 31 years, but I want to say, while watching the reports of the storm, I understood everything that they said about what was going on. A lot of people, although their power may have been out, they still had access to social media. So from a communication standpoint, a lot of people are visual. So when the utility is reporting circuits out, large numbers of customers, substations out, I think the general public is not really grasping what that means. And so if there are some visuals that could be created, I really like the one that Alonzo showed this morning on tree trimming and the cutbacks, the clearances and all that. But something that when we're saying we have a circuit out and you have thousands of people out, just something to help people visually see what that is so that they can understand the magnitude of that outage in their particular area.
Great point. Absolutely. Thanks, Liz.
And to piggyback on that comment, I'm Arnetta Macklin with MIFA. There are already a lot of established community development corporations, homeowners associations, as well as congregations, that the areas that have the higher incidents could be targeted. Can't get everything out, and again, they do a great job. I'm on a call next week regarding partnership with MLGW and our utility assistance program. But those targeted efforts, I think, will be more impactful.
Excellent.
And Doug, I think this may be directed towards you. We've got so many out-of-town property owners today in Memphis. I don't know how percentage rental property. There's got to be some ordinances that we could put in that really force those folks to keep up the property, keep up the trees. I don't know what that would be, but that would be a suggestion.
It's still morning. Good morning. And I want to address that issue. Now you're talking about ordinances. That is something that Councilwoman Robinson has been working with the proper team for the last 5 years to just get a registry so we don't have just a LLC and an address. We want a name and we want a phone number. We have gotten so much pushback from the people right here in this community who are owners of property. I need the support of everyone in this room to help me get that moved, because that's what we need. We need to be able to put our hands on the people and not a letter to an LLC that normally comes back to the city of Memphis. That's something I personally want to take an interest in, and I have been working on that with Robert Connect and his team for 5 years. I need your help now. And I appreciate everyone being here and their input, and I tell the citizens of Memphis, we can do anything you want us to do. It costs money, and we don't mind sharing the cost with you. But what you say to me as a councilwoman, we don't want to spend any more money. Take what you got and make that work. That doesn't work. So as you make recommendations, think about the impact that it will have, not just on the people in this room, but the people who cannot afford to do the tree trimming that they need to do in a community that's the oldest community in the city of Memphis, with senior citizens who do not have the income to make the changes that would, it doesn't make any sense for me to make an ordinance to say that you gotta cut your trees down there anyway, and you gotta have the burden of that when you can't afford to do it. And there are agencies that can help, but it's still not enough. Thank you.
I'd just like to emphasize something Councilwoman Robinson said, because it's an important issue. When she mentioned rental property registry, what we're talking about is people who have commercial multifamily properties simply registering whoever the individual is who is the owner. And I'll just say it out loud, local owners of multifamily properties have been the ones pushing back. We're talking about $10 per unit. And they're like howling that that is somehow egregious and going to break the bank on multifamily owners. That's what we're talking about. So when she says she needs support, we need community support for this to say, because I can't just say if you're an out-of-town owner, that I have this registry for you. It has to be for everyone, equally applied. So wherever the fee ends up being settled, we're just trying to find out, as she said, who the owner is so we can hold it accountable. What Commissioner Graves mentioned, just so y'all know, these out-of-town owners will swoop in, buy a property, sit on it, hold it, and then we'll put code actions against them. And as they get filed for court, they'll flip it to another LLC, typically someone in their family, just under a different, they'll change one letter in the name of the LLC. By the law, we have to start all over again, back to the beginning. So it's just like none of those code violations existed. So it is a complex problem. It applies equally to the things I mentioned. Overgrown weeds, a junky yard, appliances on the front porch, cars in the yard, and now trees that are interfering with the power lines. It's all an aggregate. All of those are a blight on the neighborhoods and set-outs, right? The owners who evict somebody that set all their contents on the curb. All of those are a blight on our community. This is one more that those owners who don't live here and quite frankly aren't affected by power outages, that's one way we can help is by knowing them. While I'm talking, I just want to mention a couple other things. I talked to John Zena, who's the director of the Division of Planning and Development, and Mark, thank you for bringing this up. His team is going to look at whether we have any across the city or the county. Is there any such thing like a vegetative setback? So, Steve, you brought this up a little bit. You know, when we do new developments in areas where there's overhead power, there's an easement for the power lines, but do we have anything like a policy that says within X, Y, Z, 25 feet of that easement, you can only put the following kinds of trees and with a certain kind of height? So he's going to look at that to sort of see if we can do that to help in the future. The other piece he'll look at is we have received in this community a resilience grant. And typically we think about resilience as how do we make sure that we mitigate flooding, other types of natural disaster. Based on the conversation we had today, his team is now going to look at the disruptions from natural disasters, from things that impact power lines. Largely they've been thinking about MLGW infrastructure, but now they're going to add in the vegetative part of that. And that would be a path to getting additional money from outside the community to help us plan, survey, potentially some homeowners assistance for resilience. So they're going to add in power supply, the distribution and interruption of distribution because of natural disaster as a part of the resilience plan. So what you've done here already is already making a difference. We're going to put that in as a part of our resilience plan. He's going to look at what resources we can bring to bear. So I think that will help in the long term and the near term if we can get some resources here.
Thank you. Other questions? I didn't see any hands waiting. Or other input and suggestions, I guess, is more appropriate. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Currently, Burt Renner with the code and development with the Shelby County, he and some other, 7 other arborists, mostly on the Memphis Tree Board, are working on a tree list for recommended to plant under the utility lines and along the medians and the streets. Now, Scott McCormick showed me some photos while we were on break of some trees that were interfering with utilities, and the trees were on a recent development of a multi-family apartment complex, and these trees were oak trees that were going to grow to be very large, but they were planted directly underneath the utility lines, and there was And I see that happening all over the Shelby County. Now, I think the reason for that is it's a failure of communication with the city planning department and the landscape architects, not recognizing the fact that these trees were going to be planted underneath the high power lines. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And also, the city of Memphis needs to hire an urban forester to help recognize some of these issues to prevent the future of the trees being planted underneath the utility lines. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Catching up there. Other input. Certainly looks like trees and automation are two big things.
And just remember, just kind of as maybe to help facilitate more thought, think about the things that we've talked about regarding our restoration process and the way the network is set up too, and think about, communications and the way we could, we're asking you to communicate with us. The things that, if you just go back a couple months, what happened or what was frustrating during Landon or any time there's been outages. I think we've heard some great suggestions already, but just to kind of trigger your thoughts around that, think about anything that you can think of that would help us to maybe more quickly get the power back on, or better, illuminate to you all what's going on when we are in an outage situation. Anything in the preparation process that you heard us talk about that you think might need to be honed a little bit or enhanced in any way. So think about those kinds of things as well. Maybe some things that we may can target specifically to customers ahead of time that could help them get better prepared, and or things that maybe could be made available to customers so that during an outage, if they don't have access, a long-term outage, if they don't have access to a generator or anything like that, to keep things going in their lives, just trying to expand the thought a little bit around, things that might be helpful. So be thinking about those aspects as well, because everything's on the table. Again, remember, to Councilman Robinson's point, there may be some dollars assigned, but it's not, we don't need to let that be a limitation right now. We need to really this is why we need to sky's the limit to this point and think about things that could be helpful to the community, things that you've heard about that might be helpful. So anyway, with that.
1, 2, 3.
This is a subject we haven't touched on in a while, is traffic signals. And this may be a combo question with Doug and JT or whoever, is related to that, what's going on with changing out span wire to mast arm signals, 1. 2, do signals, do they fall into the circuitry of the area around them, or are they wired differently than residential, meaning, so if things go bad, does the signal have a better chance at surviving versus a home? Or do signals come back on when that circuit comes back on? So and it seems like I read that there's some money out there from the federal government related to this issue, and I'll let y'all answer.
Yeah, I can tackle that. So the power for traffic signals is tied to the circuit that's in the area around them. The only thing they have dedicated is fiber, so that we can tell when they go out. You'll note that around the city we are changing out from the wires hanging to the mast arms. A, it's more aesthetically pleasing. B, it's more resilient. Typically in the city we have 787 signalized intersections in the county. If you didn't know, the city of Memphis maintains 100% of the signalized intersections in the county. We do it under contract to some of the other municipalities, but we do all of them, our engineering department. In the city of Memphis, we typically change out about 7 of those intersections every year. Well, 787 means in 800 years we'll have them all changed out. So to your point, Steve, no, we're not going to wait 800. We're not going to wait 100 years to get all of them changed out. We are actively going forward and looking for federal transportation dollars to do that. We have received more of that recently. In this year's budget, or in previous year's budgets, the city council had actually appropriated money, so you'll see this coming year we're going to do 28 intersections. So I've talked to, now this is where MLGW and the city intersect, because I need power connections to those, and obviously Brad and the whole team know that the design process is not the same for everyone, because the underground infrastructure is different for everyone. So we have to figure out how we're going to get power. They have to design it. So the city and MLGW have to be together on that, because I can put them up pretty quickly, but figuring out how to connect the power is sometimes complex. But so we're aware of that. The second thing I want to say is that the new mast arms come, they do have a bit of a battery backup that will allow them to operate during a short-term perturbation. And then the other thing, which creates another problem, is I actually have all of the new ones have the ability to plug a generator in. So we've talked about like your home, you can open a cover on the side, plug a generator in. Now we did that last time. And as luck would have it, we also have enterprising people in our community who say, I could use a generator, and will make themselves available to that generator, let's say. But yes, we do have the ability to plug a generator in so we can quickly get the traffic signal back online. That's a good news story for our community. It's state of the art. And I think the more we deploy these things, the better it's going to be for all of us. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that those things get back on, because we realize it's just yet another complication in an already complicated situation.
All right, that's good to know. Ms. Booker?
Yes. My comment is in line with preparation. So JT, you said think big, sky's the limit, and the things that we're going to talk about. So two things. One, not the portable generators, but like the home generators for people in the community that may be interested in purchasing one of those. I know years ago, MLGW had where we offered services that people could buy on their own. So really just promoting, educating people on those if they want to make those types of investments. But as it relates to the vulnerable populations within the community, I know people will talk about, they'll call in and they'll say that they have people on life support or on some type of medical device, their power is out. Of course, we're all concerned about the elderly, those people that are alone that need to be checked on. So if we could use our community partners in this network, so pre-event, if there's someone that may need assistance, if there's a way that they could contact whatever group or organization that supported that particular population to say, I may need some assistance, I'm here. Just trying to think of a way that people that normally wouldn't have access to hotels, to transportation, to family that could check on them, if there was a way that they could pre-event as it's going on to say, I'm here, I may need some help.
Thank you. Are there any others? So we got a good long list going here. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'll just piggyback on everything Ms. Booker's saying, because Meals on Wheels, we're already out there. So that's a great suggestion that when we know that something's happening in advance, we can distribute something out to at least our vulnerable seniors on Meals on Wheels.
Okay. There's one in the back. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention something about the tree trimming only because a friend of mine called me yesterday and was very concerned. She lives in Midtown, and they trimmed, and she doesn't know if it was MLGW or City of Memphis, but they trimmed a big tree that was on her curb that the limbs hung over the street. So all on one side of her tree, they trimmed all those hanging over the street. But she says if the wind blows in her direction, that big old tree's going to fall over on her house because it's just all on one side of the way. And I meant to get a picture of it to bring, but I didn't have time to go get it for today's meeting. But now there weren't any lines; they were just trimming over the street, covered the street, not over any lines.
If you can provide us the address, I can certainly look into it. One of the things we did as a city, we did I think 60,000 dangerous limbs. So when I say dangerous, it wasn't because of the power lines. There may have been a fractured limb that was hanging over the sidewalk. And while it might not take power out, if you're the unlucky person walking under there when that falls, that's what we were trying to eliminate, or your car. So And yes, we understand, very much like the power line trimming, we were trying to eliminate the immediate threat. So, but they should try to take a balanced approach if they can. Much like was mentioned earlier, we try to take the minimum number of limbs. Some people don't want us to take any. Some people want us to balance. Other people just take the limbs that are affected. So, and I won't say that we were anything like 100% perfect, because we weren't. We did some work that was probably, a little too aggressive in some areas, but it was all aimed at just trying to prevent things from falling down and injuring people.
All right, well, we can wrap up here. I think there's a lot of input, and certainly there's a tentative meeting scheduled for June the 16th. Will that be back here as well?
If we can get, and Tiffany, I'm gonna ask Tiffany or Doug to sort of verify the availability of this space for that date, the 16th of June at 9, so we'll be wanting to finalize or circle back up here at that time if we can. Okay.
Yeah, so certainly it's been a great location here, I know, and at that point in time, the scope would be to bring in the final recommendations with timing.
Brian, there's one more, looks like another question.
That means all the other dates we were given.
Yes, disregard those other dates, please. That's a good point, yeah.
I have a question. I have a very difficult time finding out information on the MLGW website. Like when I looked for this meeting, it was not posted until yesterday. And then I saw where there's a little segment that had, you have to go to memphis.com to get the information on the OIP meeting today. It wasn't listed on the MLGW website, it was listed on the city of Memphis. Am I correct?
Gail, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there should be a link from our website that if you go to that.
It wasn't a link that you could click on.
We should have that, and if we don't, we'll fix that.
Okay, but I
Yes.
inserted in the search box, it was
Okay.
Mississippi/gov.
Oh, that's for the comments, right.
Well, that's the issue that everything.
Okay, well, we'll clarify that. Thank you for that input. We'll fix that. Thank you. We'll get that squared away.
All right, yeah, thank you. But at the next meeting, that's going to be when we kind of bring it together, wrap it up, should be the final meeting. Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
I had a question, but I want to give it to Mr. Weaver.
Okay.
And I'll let him state it because I don't want to be able to do, so we'll let him do it.
All right. Yes, ma'am. But yeah, we will come in and look at these final recommendations and kind of the timing that it would take to implement them, as well as the cost and reliability impacts. But certainly there are a lot of ways that this can be accomplished, and certainly MLGW staff is going to work on that and put that together and allow us to come back in. So with that, I will hand it over to JT and Doug.
Doug, do you have any thoughts, closing thoughts before we roll out? I know the good news is we're giving you back about 45 minutes. So.
I think this is really good, and as I mentioned before, we'll get together internally as a team. We'll put all these in different categories, and I think what we mentioned we'll do short, medium, long term. We'll try to put some cost to those. We will bring in some of the other necessary divisions and partners. I hadn't planned on the Division of Planning and Development being a part of this, but now they're looped in. So certainly invite my municipal partners from in the county and other municipalities if you guys would like to join us in a small internal meeting about policies that we could agree to. I think that would be important for us to do before the next meeting, just to get a sense of where we could go. So I just really appreciate the good thinking, and I appreciate the earnestness that everybody's had to give us ideas about how to really improve our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. And so to wrap up just real quick, thank you all again for being here. A couple of quick things. One is I heard some of the solutions or thoughts around potential solutions. I think what's really important, and as we get together, as Doug said, in the interim between today and the 16th, to sort of formulate and hone in on what this may look like, I think it's really important for us to remember that the best time, and I come from a storm-plagued state in Florida with hurricanes, but the best time to get ready for this and to deal with this is not during, but before the storm occurs. And so as we think about solutions, one of the things that I think would be helpful is for us to think about things that we can do to help and help everyone, but especially our most vulnerable who have challenges, to make sure that make sure they all have as much as we can do. I mean, we can't make sure we'll do what we can to make sure everyone has it, but to make sure everyone's educated around if the power goes out, how can we make sure we communicate with them, but also how we make sure that they can sustain life and the quality of life they need during that time. And then really it's on MLGW to make sure we minimize the length of time of that outage, and that's all based on the things you heard us talk about. So we're going to be working diligently to make sure that happens, and so the economic part of that, of course, will be a consideration, but we'll move forward with that. So I say thank you because even when we come back next time, there may be some things that weren't on this list that you may see pop up that we may talk about the next time we get together. And look, if there's something that just strikes you after today, don't feel like you can't share it, you all know how to connect, make sure you provide that information, the sooner the better, so we can weave that into the solution. So again, appreciate so much you being here, certainly to our board chair, Commissioner Graves, and certainly to all of you, and certainly to you, Councilwoman Robinson, and your leadership on the MLGW committee and the council. So I want to thank you for that as well. The other last couple of things I'll mention is Go Grizz, and I know that notwithstanding the one game ejection for, just to clarify that, Dylan Brooks, I'm pumped up about one of the coaches is my neighbor, Dave McClure, so he and I kind of talk a lot about what's going on with him, so I get some inside knowledge. If they need me, they'll call me. But anyway, whatever. And then the last thing, to those of you who are mothers out here, I just want to say Happy Mother's Day in advance. Thank you for your sacrificial time. What was that about? Sacrificial. I wanted to say to the mothers out here that I know you all have done some great things for your children, and we appreciate you. All of us have a mother, had a mother, may not have her with us now, but thank you for being a mom, and wish you the best. Blessed Mother's Day. But again, everyone be safe. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.